They laughed at the veteran's strange wraparound shed, until the worst winter in a decade proved it was the only thing keeping anyone alive. As the blizzard closed in on Sierra Valley, Cole Maddox and his loyal dog, Ranger, fought to stay warm while the storm crushed every woodpile for miles. But when the valley went dark and families ran out of fuel, one thing stood standing: Cole's crazy invention the whole town mocked. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The wind slammed against the cabin walls like a battering ram, each impact shaking loose a shiver from the old timber. It was the kind of storm Sierra Valley folks whispered about, but hoped never to see again. A whiteout monster that erased the world outside and turned every breath into ice. Snow twisted through the air in violent spirals, scratching at the windows as if trying to claw its way in. The temperature had fallen so fast, the thermometer beside the door froze halfway through its descent, its glass frosting over at -31. Cole Maddox knelt beside the cast-iron stove, feeding it the last of the loose kindling. His breath fogged the air in pale bursts. The heat barely held against the fury outside. The cabin groaned in protest, as if begging the night for mercy. Behind him, Ranger whimpered. Cole spun toward the sound. The German shepherd lay curled tight on the floor, his thick winter coat dusted with frost where the cold had seeped through the floorboards. His breathing came shallow, each inhale a trembling struggle. When Cole touched Ranger's side, the dog's body flinched beneath his hand. Cold, far too cold. "Hey, bud. Hey, stay with me." His voice cracked through the roar of the blizzard. Ranger blinked slowly, as if fighting to stay awake. His ears twitched, but didn't lift. The dog had weathered storms with Cole before. Sandstorms in Kandahar, bitter desert nights after missions gone wrong. But this cold was different. It was merciless. It was the kind that stole warmth straight from the bones. Cole swallowed hard, his pulse punching against his ribs. The stove wouldn't be enough. Not tonight. Not with the cold eating through every seam in the old cabin. He looked toward the narrow door at the back of the room, the one that opened into his wraparound shed, the design everyone in Sierra Valley had mocked for months. The Maddox porch maze, Walt Reddick called it. The doghouse castle, others joked. Even the mayor laughed, wondering out loud how long it would take for the weird structure to collapse under snow. But right now, it was the only thing that might save Ranger's life. Cole tugged his coat from a hook and wrapped it around the trembling dog. Ranger tried to stand and failed. The sight punched a breath out of Cole, like the moments overseas when a teammate fell and the world snapped into a deafening silence around him. Not again. Not him. Cole slid an arm under Ranger's chest, lifting him gently but firmly. The dog's head rested against Cole's shoulder, too tired even to resist. Snow sifted under the cabin door with every gust. The temperature in the room dipped again. He didn't have minutes. He had seconds. Cole kicked open the back door and was hit by a blast of frigid air so sharp it felt like broken glass slicing across his skin. But the shed, his strange wraparound shelter, blocked most of the wind, creating a pocket of stillness beneath its low eaves. Snow swirled outside the perimeter, but here, under the circular roof he'd built with his own hands, the stacked firewood stood dry and untouched. The wood was everything he'd hoped it would be, seasoned, sheltered, and ready to burn hot. Cole dropped to one knee, holding Ranger close as he gathered several thick logs from the nearest stack. The dog shivered violently, his breath warming Cole's collar as the storm wailed only a few feet away. "You're all right, Ranger. I've got you." His voice stayed steady out loud, but inside, panic pushed against his ribs. He pressed the logs to his chest, making a shield around Ranger as he turned back toward the cabin. The blizzard screamed behind him, furious, hungry. Snow cut sideways through the gaps of the shed like a blade. But Cole leaned into the wind, muscles straining, boot treads slipping on the icy floorboards as he fought his way back to the door. Ranger whimpered again. Low, helpless. It nearly broke him. Inside the cabin, he dropped the logs beside the stove and pulled Ranger close to the firelight, wrapping blankets around him. The dog's eyes fluttered open, but barely held focus. Cole placed a hand over Ranger's ribs, feeling the shallow, fast breaths. No, he whispered. Not tonight. Not like this. He shoved the logs into the stove, sparks leaping as the flames grabbed hold. The heat rose fast, faster than any wood he'd burned before. Dry wood, perfect wood, protected wood, exactly like he'd planned, exactly like no one believed him about. He knelt beside Ranger again, pressing his forehead to the dog's. His heart hammered with fear, each beat a reminder of the battles he'd survived. The brothers he hadn't managed to save. The promises he'd made when he adopted Ranger from the working dog unit 2 years earlier. I'm not losing you, he whispered fiercely. I don't lose my own. The storm raged on, shaking the cabin, howling through the valley like something alive. Cole held Ranger against him, praying the heat would rise fast enough. The blankets would trap enough warmth. The fire wouldn't die again. Minutes stretched like hours. Ranger's breathing steadied, barely. Cole exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His eyes burned with cold, exhaustion, and something heavier. Something that felt like the fear he'd carried home from war. The fear of losing the only soul who'd never left his side. He looked toward the wraparound shed through the small back window. Snow battered it, but the structure held strong. Dry wood stacked high, ready, waiting. They had a chance, but only if the storm didn't get worse. Only if Ranger lasted through the night. Only if the fire never went out. And the night had only just begun. Stay with me, boy, Cole whispered, stroking the side of Ranger's neck. Outside, the blizzard roared, merciless, unending, unforgiving. Inside, a veteran knelt beside the only companion who had never abandoned him, and prepared to fight the cold the same way he'd fought every impossible battle before. Not with strength, not with luck, but with pure, stubborn will. The fire cracked. Ranger trembled once more, and Cole prayed the heat would win. Because if it didn't, nothing else would. Morning never truly arrived in Sierra Valley that day. The storm had wrung the night dry, but left behind a strange gray half-light, the kind that made it impossible to tell whether dawn was coming or retreating. The wind had calmed to a low moan, drifting across the snowfields like a wounded animal searching for shelter. Cole Maddox opened his eyes slowly, the ache in his muscles reminding him he'd slept sitting upright on the floor, with Ranger's head resting against his thigh. The fire had burned low to a bed of glowing embers, still fighting, still alive. Ranger breathed softly, weak but steady. That alone pushed a breath of relief from Cole's chest. He eased himself up, stretching stiff legs, careful not to wake the dog if he didn't have to. Ranger needed warmth and rest more than anything. Cole placed another log in the stove, watching the flames catch and spread. Heat. Light. Two things he hadn't taken for granted since Afghanistan. He turned toward the frost-lined window, wiping away a thin sheet of ice with his sleeve. The view outside was a frozen world carved from silver and white. Trees bent under heavy coats of snow. Fence posts disappeared entirely. Drifts lay stacked almost to the cabin windowsill. It reminded him of those desert nights when the moon made the dunes look like an ocean of ash, silent, endless, and watching. But here, the silence felt heavier. Cole stood for a moment, letting himself breathe. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding everything in. Fear for Ranger, fear of failing again, fear of waking up to another day where the world felt too loud, too sharp, too unpredictable. PTSD had a way of turning every morning into a battlefield. But this valley, he'd come here believing it might be the one place quiet enough to let him rebuild. A soft rustle behind him made him glance over. Ranger tried to lift his head but barely managed half the effort before sinking back down. Cole knelt beside him, rubbing a hand across the thick fur between his ears. "You're tough, buddy, but don't push it." Ranger's eyes half opened, amber and trusting. Cole swallowed. "Yeah, I know. I'm not good at resting either." He stood and moved toward the small kitchenette, grabbing a pot and filling it with melted snow he'd collected from a bucket beside the stove. As it heated, he glanced around the cabin, the inherited place he still didn't quite know how to feel about. It was old, worn down by time, its log walls marked by decades of winters. The roof sagged on one corner. Half the window frames were crooked. But it was his. The letter from the lawyer had arrived 6 months ago, telling him an uncle he barely remembered had passed and left him the property. At the time, Cole had been floating between jobs, unable to sleep more than 3 hours a night, unable to stay in crowded spaces without feeling his chest clamp down. Ranger had been the only reason he got out of bed. So when the opportunity came to disappear into the mountains with his dog, he took it. He poured warm water into Ranger's bowl and placed it gently beside him. "Here, easy now." Ranger lifted his head an inch and lapped slowly. Every movement shook his body. But he was drinking. That was enough. Cole exhaled again, long and shaky. The tension in his shoulders refused to leave, but that was nothing new. It had followed him home from the battlefield and stayed like a shadow that knew his secrets. He walked to the back door and cracked it open just enough to look out at the wraparound shed. Snow coated the roof in a thick white blanket, but the structure held firm. Beneath it, stacks of perfectly dry firewood waited untouched by the storm. He felt a flicker of pride, small but warm in his chest. They had all laughed, every last one of them. The mayor with his smug grin, Walt Reddick with his loud opinions about real mountain men, the hunters at the trading post, the ranch hands at the feed store, even the old-timers who barely looked up from their coffee. A wraparound shed? All the way around the cabin? Built by a city boy? A vet who looked like he jumped every time a truck backfired? They didn't understand the logic. They didn't understand him. Cole closed the door and leaned his back against it, rubbing his tired face. He could still hear some of the whispers. He's not right in the head. Poor dog, living with a ticking time bomb. Bet he won't last through November. He wasn't angry. Not really. People feared what didn't fit their picture of normal. And a former Navy SEAL with a service dog, building strange structures and living in isolation, didn't fit anyone's idea of normal. But Cole wasn't trying to impress Sierra Valley. He was trying to survive it. Behind him, Ranger let out a soft groan. Cole immediately crossed the room and knelt again, checking his dog's paws, his breathing, his temperature. The memory hit hard and uninvited. Lying in the dust next to a fallen teammate overseas, hearing labored breaths slipping away, unable to stop it. Not again. Not this time. He pressed his forehead briefly to Ranger's, grounding himself. "You hear me? You're not going anywhere. Not now. Not after everything we've been through." The dog nudged weakly at Cole's wrist, a silent acknowledgement. A small smile tugged at the corner of Cole's mouth. "That's right. You're stubborn. Wonder where you got that from." Outside, the storm clouds began to drift, letting through a thin band of blue. It cast a gentle glow across the snow-covered valley, serene, untouched, dangerous. Cole stood, checking his coat and gloves. He needed to inspect the shed, make sure the supports hadn't cracked. The cabin would not make it through another night if anything had shifted. But he'd only taken 2 steps toward the door when Ranger whimpered again. The sound rooted him in place. He knelt one more time. "I'll be right back, buddy. Just a minute. Hold on for me." Ranger's eyes followed him all the way to the door. As Cole stepped out into the cold, the snow crunched beneath his boots, the air burning his lungs on contact. The valley stretched wide and quiet, the storm's wreckage painted across every ridge and tree line. He moved along the shed's perimeter, checking joints, beams, the weight distribution of the snow. Everything held exactly as he designed it. Tight, dry, strong. For the first time since arriving in this valley, he felt something shift inside him. Not confidence, not triumph, but the beginning of belonging. Still, he knew what the town thought of him. A broken veteran hiding in the woods, a man running from his past instead of facing it, a guy who talked more to his dog than to people. They didn't know him. Most never cared to. But they would. Because someday, maybe sooner than any of them expected, they would need the very thing they mocked. And the storm last night was only the beginning. Cole brushed frost from his beard and headed back to Ranger. The valley might not trust him yet, but the winter would give him a chance to prove them all wrong. Weeks before the storm, before Sierra Valley learned what -30 could do to a man's bones, Cole Maddox had stood in the exact same spot, staring at the crooked old cabin he'd inherited. The late summer wind brushed through the pines, carrying the smell of sap and dust. Ranger trotted beside him, tail swishing through dry grass, head lifting to track every sound in the woods. Back then, the cabin looked like something waiting to collapse under its own regret. The roof sagged, the porch leaned, and the walls had more gaps than solid grain. But the worst flaw wasn't structural. It was the empty stretch of dirt between the cabin and the old woodpile 20 feet away. Cole crouched beside Ranger, pointing toward it. "You see the problem, buddy?" Ranger sniffed the air as if giving an opinion. "Yeah, me too. No way I'm sprinting through 3 feet of snow in the dark just to grab wet firewood." The dog huffed, almost in agreement. Cole's mind drifted back to nights overseas, cold desert nights when his unit built makeshift shelters from anything they could find. Tents, broken truck panels, spare plywood, even stacked rucksacks, anything to slow the wind and keep the heat in. He remembered wrapping gear around the perimeter of sleeping quarters so no one had to step into open fire zones to retrieve supplies. Shelter wasn't just structure. Shelter was strategy. And Sierra Valley, with its unpredictable storms and brutal temperatures, demanded strategy too. He stood slowly, scanning the perimeter of the cabin, the way he used to assess a landing zone. "What if," he murmured, "the shelter wasn't separate from the house at all?" Ranger tilted his head. "What if we bring the woodpile to the cabin, and the cover goes all the way around?" The idea bloomed in his mind. Strange, yes, but clear. A ring-like structure hugging the cabin, shielding every side, keeping firewood elevated and bone dry. No wasted steps, no exposure. A soldier's solution to a settler's problem. He grabbed a stick and began sketching in the dirt. Angled roof, support posts, airflow gaps designed to season the wood faster. Ranger circled him, occasionally stepping on the lines, forcing Cole to redraw them. He didn't mind. The dog's presence kept him grounded. "You and me, boy. We're gonna build something they've never seen." They hadn't, and they weren't ready for it. The next morning, Cole hitched a ride into town to buy nails, lumber, and roofing sheets. The trading post bell jingled as he entered. Folks turned to stare, some curious, some guarded, a few whispering under their breath. He pretended not to notice. Martha Tolliver, the store owner with a face like weathered oak, raised an eyebrow. "Morning, Cole. Need something besides dog food today?" He adjusted his cap. "Yeah, I'm building an extension around the whole cabin." Silence. Then a snort from the corner. Walt Reddick, A thick-armed rancher with a permanent scowl leaned back in his chair. Around the whole cabin? Like a skirt? Cole ignored the laugh. It'll protect the wood. Keep it dry. Walt chuckled louder. Several men joined in. Martha tried to hide a smile behind her ledger. Honey, nobody builds sheds around their entire house. Lumber ain't cheap, you know. It's not a shed, Cole said calmly. It's a wraparound barrier, multi-purpose. Walt slapped his knee. Barrier? From what? Coyotes? Snowflakes? City boys? Someone muttered. PTSD must have scrambled him. Cole's jaw tightened. Ranger, waiting outside, barked once. Sharp, protective. Cole paid for his supplies without another word and walked out, feeling eyes burn into his back. He'd learned long ago that people talked when they didn't understand something. He wasn't here to impress them. He was here to survive. Later that week, he began digging post holes under the warm autumn sun. Ranger supervised from a shady patch of pine needles, occasionally nudging a tool closer with his nose. Cole worked with a rhythm. Dig, measure, level, set. Sweat ran down his spine, the smell of fresh dirt rising with every strike of the shovel. When the first row of posts stood in place, he stepped back to take in the sight. The outline of the wraparound shed formed a wide ring around the cabin, a strange skeleton of what would soon be a weather shield. To him, it made perfect sense. To everyone else, not so much. It started with Mayor Hank Doyle riding by on his mare, pausing at the fence line. Maddox, what on earth are you building? Cole wiped his brow. A protective shed, wraparound design. The mayor frowned. Looks more like a trap for the wind. Snow will pile up, crush the whole thing. I accounted for that, Cole replied. Roof pitch, airflow, load distribution. Mayor Doyle cut him off with a dismissive wave. Son, this valley's seen winter long before you. Stick to what's proven. A day later, teenagers stood at the road, whispering and laughing. By the weekend, half the valley seemed to have an opinion. Waste of effort. Looks like a giant chicken coop. Must be a vet thing. They can't think straight. Each comment pricked at something old inside Cole. Something raw. Something he thought he'd left overseas. A feeling that people saw him as broken before they saw him as human. But every time doubt crept in, Ranger nudged his knee, grounding him. They worked through September, the roof beams rising into place, the angled planks locking in perfectly. Cole used old military tarp to shield the unfinished sections from rain, just long enough to finish the shingles. He reinforced the posts, added crossbeams, tested the airflow, and slowly the structure transformed. Not beautiful, not traditional, but functional. By early October, he had a full ring of shelter surrounding the cabin like a wooden fortress. Cole stood with Ranger at the center, the late afternoon light glowing warm around them. He rested a hand on the dog's neck. They can laugh, he murmured, but we'll see who's laughing in December. Ranger barked once, strong and proud, and for a moment Cole felt a fragile spark of hope. But hope in Sierra Valley was a fragile thing, and winter was coming faster than either of them realized. By late October, the air carried a sharp bite, one that slipped beneath coats, past skin, and settled deep in the joints. Frost clung to every fence post at dawn, glittering like glass. Even the birds seemed quieter, sensing the shift. Cole Maddox woke before sunrise each morning, moving stiffly through the cold as he checked the last details of the wraparound shed. Ranger followed close behind, still limping from an old strain but determined as ever. His ears flicked at every sound, his breath puffed white in the brisk air. Almost done, buddy, Cole murmured, tightening the last beam. Just a few more days and we'll be ready. But readiness was a strange word for him. He had heard it too many times overseas, right before nights that ended in chaos, right before missions that went sideways, right before the world cracked open. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the echo of something metallic. An old tree creaking under its own weight, but sharp, abrupt, too close. The sound hit him like a hammer. A snap, a shout. Sand exploding in his face, someone yelling, "Get down!" right before the ground shook. His breath caught, his vision blurred, the world narrowing to a tunnel. The cold Montana forest around him dissolved, replaced by the dust-choked mountains of Afghanistan. Ranger barked sharply, sensing the shift, but the sound twisted through Cole's mind as distant gunfire. His pulse began to race, thudding against his ribs. He staggered back, gripping the nearest beam. The smell of pine disappeared, replaced by diesel fuel, sweat, burning sand. "No, no, not now," he whispered through clenched teeth. Another crack split the air, the tree groaning again in the wind, but all Cole heard was a mortar dropping, too close, too familiar. He ducked instinctively, panic tightening his throat. Ranger rushed to him, pressing his body against Cole's legs, barking again, louder, sharper, trying to pull him back. Cole gripped the dog's fur with both hands, grounding himself as the memory stormed through him. His breath came fast and uneven, his vision shook, his knees hit the frozen ground. He shut his eyes, fighting the past with every ounce of strength he had left. "You're here," he whispered to himself. "Montana. Woods. Cabin." But his voice trembled. "Ranger, help me out, buddy." The dog licked his wrist, a quiet whine rising from deep in his chest. Cole let the sound steady him. He focused on Ranger's warmth, the solid weight of him, the smell of his coat, a scent that had pulled him back countless times before. Slowly, painfully, the images began to fade. The dust turned back to snow. The distant explosions became nothing more than branches snapping under frost. The roar of a battlefield thinned into the whistle of valley wind. When Cole finally lifted his head, the world settled around him again. Winter pines, pale sky, the half-built shed circling his cabin like a wooden guardian. He wiped a shaking hand across his forehead. "Damn it," he muttered. "Thought I was past that." Ranger pushed his head under Cole's arm, urging him upright. "Yeah, I know." Cole exhaled shakily. "One step at a time." He rose slowly, brushing snow from his knees. His body felt heavy, worn from the battle inside his mind. He hated how suddenly it hit. No warning, no time to brace. Just a sound, a smell, a flicker of memory, and suddenly he wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in a place he'd sworn he'd left. Cole grabbed the axe he'd dropped earlier. His fingers trembled around the handle. Ranger walked in front of him, watching carefully, refusing to move until Cole steadied. "I'm fine," Cole assured him. Or maybe he was trying to convince himself. "We've got work to do." Ranger didn't budge. His eyes stayed locked on Cole's face. "You're too smart for your own good," Cole said with a ghost of a smile. Finally, Ranger stepped aside, letting Cole approach the next log. The tree that had caused the triggering sound creaked again, this time more softly, like an apology. Cole lifted the axe, positioning his stance. He hesitated. For a moment, the weight of the axe felt like the weight of his past. Same pressure, same responsibility, same fear that one wrong move could cost everything. He drew in a long breath through his nose, letting the cold steady his nerves. Then he swung. The blade bit through the wood cleanly. No visions, no shouts, just the honest crack of timber splitting apart. Cole exhaled through clenched teeth and swung again, finding his rhythm. Each strike pushed the tremors further away. Each breath pulled him further into the present. By the time he stacked the fresh pieces under the shed roof, the sun had begun its slow drop behind the western ridge. The valley glowed in soft orange and dusty pink, peaceful in a way that felt almost unreal. Cole wiped the sweat and frost from his brow. Ranger sat beside him, leaning into his hip. You saved me again, Cole said quietly. Ranger nudged him once, firm and sure. Cole gazed at the wraparound shed, the posts, the beams, the angled roof catching the last of the sunlight. To anyone else, it was a bizarre wooden ring. To him, it was control, protection, a plan he could hold onto when his mind threatened to slip away. Let them laugh, he said under his breath. As long as this keeps us alive. The breeze picked up, rustling the roof shingles softly. The valley air had changed. Winter wasn't just coming. It was close enough to taste, sharp and metallic. Cole placed a hand on Ranger's neck. We're gonna make it through, he whispered. No matter what the valley thinks. No matter what the past throws at us. Ranger's tail brushed the ground. The moment felt still, fragile, like glass resting on the edge of a table. Then the first flakes of early snow drifted down from the twilight sky, and Cole knew the real test had barely begun. The next morning, Sierra Valley woke to a thin white blanket frosting the ground, the kind of early snow that didn't stay long, but warned everyone what was coming. It coated the fields like powdered sugar over a cold, unforgiving land. Cole stepped outside with Ranger at his heel, the dog moving cautiously, but with more strength than the day before. The storm had shaken them both, but the calm after it felt deceitful, quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. Cole did one last inspection of the wraparound shed, tightening a beam here, tapping a support post there. Everything held firm. The snow slid off the angled roof exactly as he'd designed. Ranger sniffed the perimeter, tail flicking with curiosity. For a brief second, Cole felt a rare swell of confidence. Maybe, just maybe, he'd found a way to get ahead of this winter. But confidence lasted only as long as it took for tires to crunch up his frozen driveway. A black truck pulled in, Mayor Hank Doyle's. The man stepped out wearing a brown wool coat and the expression of someone prepared to deliver bad news and enjoy it. Beside him trudged Walt Reddick, arms crossed, jaw tight, boots stomping the snow like it owed him money. Ranger let out a low, warning rumble. Cole put a hand on the dog's shoulder. Easy. But he felt the same instinct Ranger did, bracing. Morning, Maddox, the mayor called, voice clipped by the cold. Cole nodded. Mayor, Walt, something I can help you with? Walt's eyes roamed the shed with almost theatrical disapproval. You call this helpin' the valley? He said, pointing at the wooden ring. Whole place looks like a lumberyard swallowed your cabin. It's functional, Cole answered simply. The mayor stepped closer, boots crunching through the thin snow. We've gotten complaints, son. Cole stiffened, though he kept his voice controlled. Complaints about what? That, the mayor said, gesturing broadly. It's an eyesore. Folks don't appreciate looking out their windows and seeing whatever this is supposed to be. Cole swallowed irritation that felt hot against the cold air. It's shelter. The wood stays dry, close, accessible. Walt snorted. Dry wood? Maddox, every man in this valley knows how to season wood. We stack it out back and cover it with tarp. Been doing it since before you were born. Cole met his stare. And every winter, half of it gets snowed in. That's winter, Walt barked. You deal with it. You don't build a fortress around your house like you're holding a position overseas. The words hit harder than they should have. Cole froze. Breath caught midair. The mayor shot Walt a warning look, but Walt wasn't the kind to reel anything in. Cole exhaled slowly through his nose. I'm not bothering anyone. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just preparing for winter. The mayor softened his tone, but not enough to hide the condescension. This valley has a way of doing things, Maddox. People stick to what works. Newcomers usually adapt. Cole studied the lines of the shed. Solid, smart, protective. And sometimes, old ways leave people exposed. Walt scoffed. There it is. Mr. Seal thinks he knows more about Montana than folks who've lived here their whole lives. Ranger stepped forward, hackles raised. Cole rested his hand on the dog's neck again, firm but calm. I didn't come here to fight, Cole said. I came here to live quietly, make my own way. Well, the mayor said, clearing his throat, quiet starts with respecting the valley's norms. Folks don't like change, and they sure don't like feeling like they're being shown up. Cole blinked. Shown up? By a shed? You built it like we're ignorant, Walt growled. Like none of us can prepare for winter. That's not what this is, Cole said, voice tightening. This is me making sure my dog and I don't freeze. The mayor glanced toward Ranger, whose brown eyes were fixed on the men like he was reading their intentions one breath at a time. We're not trying to run you out of the valley, the mayor said. But when folks start complaining, I gotta address it. Cole looked between them, feeling the weight of the valley's judgment settling over him like the first heavy snowfall. And what exactly do you want from me? Walt smirked. Tear it down, Ranger growled, a deep, visceral sound that shivered through the cold air. The mayor raised a hand. Now hold on. No one's demanding that. Not yet. But we do expect you to keep it within town guidelines. There are no guidelines, Cole replied. I checked. Well, the mayor admitted, clearing his throat. We're working on adding some. Cole stared at them for a long, silent moment. The cold seeped deeper into his bones, heavier than the frost. He wasn't just building a shed. They thought he was challenging their way of life. And that made him an outsider, a threat, someone they needed to push back into line. Walt turned to leave. Good luck when the wind takes that roof off. The mayor followed, giving Cole a curt nod before climbing into the truck. They drove off, leaving tracks that cut through the thin snow like scars. Cole stood motionless. The sky had darkened again, clouds gathering in a slow, heavy march. Ranger pressed himself against Cole's leg, sensing the tension that still hung in the air. Cole dropped to one knee, scratching behind the dog's ear. They don't get it, he murmured. Ranger leaned closer. And they don't have to, Cole added quietly. We didn't build this for them. A gust of wind pushed through the valley, carrying the faint echo of distant thunder, out of place this time of year, unsettling. Cole looked toward the mountains, watching the sky shift. Winter was coming fast, faster than anyone expected, and the valley's disapproval was nothing compared to what the storm would bring. He stood, brushing snow off his jeans, and headed back toward the cabin with Ranger at his side, both of them stepping through the cold like men walking into a battle they didn't choose but couldn't avoid. Inside, the fire flickered. Outside, the first true signs of winter crept across Sierra Valley, and Cole Maddox knew the storm wouldn't just test his shed. It would test everything he was trying so hard to rebuild. The deeper winter pressed into Sierra Valley, the quieter the woods became. Animals moved less. The air tightened. Even the river seemed to run slower beneath its forming skin of ice. Cole felt it all pressing in, like the whole valley was holding its breath. He spent the following mornings splitting wood under the gray sky, the rhythmic crack of his axe echoing through the trees. Ranger patrolled the perimeter, nose to the wind, every sense alert. Despite the tension with the townsfolk, Cole had settled into a fragile peace with the land itself. That peace shattered one late afternoon. The sun hung low, a dim copper disk sinking behind black pines. Cole swung the axe one last time, the log splitting clean. He wiped his breath-clouded glasses and called out, "Ranger! Water break!" But the dog didn't come. Cole glanced toward the tree line. Ranger never wandered far, not unless something had drawn him. A knot tightened in Cole's stomach. "Ranger?" His voice cut through the stillness, sharper now. Then it came, the sound that made every hair rise along Cole's neck. A snarl, a deep, vicious one. followed by a yelp. Not just any bark, Ranger's bark. A bark edged with pain. Cole dropped the axe and sprinted toward the woods, boots slamming through the thin crust of snow. His pulse hammered. The cold knifed his throat. He tore through underbrush until he reached a small clearing shadowed by fir trees. And there he saw it. Ranger stood braced between Cole's cabin and a gaunt, starving coyote, its ribs visible beneath mangy fur, its eyes wild with hunger. Blood already streaked Ranger's shoulder. The dog held his ground, growling low, buying time until Cole arrived. "Ranger, back!" Cole commanded instinctively. But Ranger didn't back down. He lunged as the coyote snapped again. The two bodies collided in a blur of teeth and snow. Ranger drove the animal sideways, but the coyote twisted with desperate strength, jaws clamping onto Ranger's flank. "No!" Cole's voice broke out of him, raw and panicked. Without thinking, without hesitation, he grabbed a fallen branch and swung. His strike connected with a dull thud. The coyote stumbled, dazed, then limped off into the shadows, disappearing into the thickening dusk. Ranger collapsed into the snow. Cole dropped to his knees, pulling the dog against him. "Ranger, oh God, stay with me! Stay with me!" Warm blood soaked into his gloves. His breath shook. His chest tightened painfully, too fast, too familiar. The edges of his vision trembled as old memories surged. Dust storms, night raids, the weight of a dying teammate slipping through his arms. "No, no, no," he whispered, gripping Ranger's fur hard enough that his knuckles blanched. "Not again. Not you." His lungs refused to fill. The world spun. The snow, the trees, the cold, they all flickered like a broken film reel. Then Ranger gave a soft whine, just that sound. Small, pained, but alive. It snapped Cole back. He inhaled sharply, forcing air into his chest. He lifted Ranger gently into his arms, ignoring the pain shooting through his shoulder, and began the trudging run back to the cabin. "Hang on, buddy," he breathed, slipping once on the icy ground. "I got you. I got you. Don't quit on me." Inside the cabin, Cole lowered Ranger onto a blanket near the stove. The dog's breathing was shallow. Blood seeped slowly, forming dark stains on the wool. Cole grabbed his first aid pack, muscle memory taking over. Water. Clean cloth. Pressure. He had treated wounds before. Too many. But treating Ranger felt different, terrifying in a way he couldn't explain. "You saved me today," Cole murmured, voice breaking as he cleaned the wound. "Now let me save you." Ranger's eyes fluttered open, soft, trusting, unbearably loyal. Cole held pressure until the bleeding eased. He wrapped the wound lightly, knowing it wasn't deep enough to threaten Ranger's life but severe enough to slow him down. When it was done, Cole sat beside him, back against the stove, exhaustion crashing over him like a second storm. Ranger rested his head on Cole's knee, tail twitching faintly. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, swirling through the shed beams, humming like a warning. Cole stroked Ranger's head slowly. "You're not supposed to protect me like that anymore," he whispered. "We left that world behind." But deep down, he knew they hadn't. Not really. The battlefield lived inside him, and Ranger sensed every shadow. As the fire popped softly and the cabin warmed, Cole let his hand rest on Ranger's back, feeling the dog's heartbeat. Steady, reassuring, a lifeline. But his own heart wouldn't settle. Because tonight wasn't about a starving coyote. It wasn't about the wound he'd bandaged. It wasn't about the blood on the snow. It was a reminder. Winter wasn't the only threat in Sierra Valley. And danger didn't always come with warning. Cole tightened the blanket around Ranger's body, jaw set, eyes fixed on the cabin door as the wind howled outside. "Whatever's coming," he whispered, "we face it together." Ranger's tail gave one quiet thump, and the valley plunged into night. For the next stretch of days, time in Sierra Valley seemed to move differently, slow where it should have been quick, heavy where it should have been simple. Early winter crept across the land with a low, patient threat, covering the pine branches in frost that thickened a little more each morning. Silence hung over the valley like a blanket, broken only by the distant crack of ice expanding on the river or the lonely call of a raven overhead. Inside the cabin, Cole settled into a strict routine designed to keep Ranger alive and himself functioning. Dawn to dusk, he worked with a steady, controlled determination, splitting logs, stacking wood, finishing the last braces on the shed. But everything he did orbited around one priority: Ranger. The dog still moved slowly, a small hitch in his step from the coyote attack. But the wound was healing. Cole cleaned it every morning, checking carefully for swelling, infection, anything that looked wrong. He worked silently, his hands steady but his jaw tight. "You're healing," he'd murmur. "You're stubborn. That's good. That's why we're both still breathing." Ranger would lick his wrist every time, as if reminding him he wasn't the only one doing the saving. During daylight, Cole trained Ranger gently, guiding him through short exercises to keep his muscles from stiffening. Ranger followed every command with effortful concentration, tail wagging weakly each time Cole praised him. The dog's resilience had always impressed him, but now it humbled him. Cole had seen soldiers break under less. Between chores, Cole continued refining the shed, adjusting angles, reinforcing joints, checking the airflow in every section. He tested different stacking patterns for the firewood, raising the base a few inches more to keep the snowmelt from touching it. He added a windbreak panel on the northern side after noticing how the valley gusts swirled unpredictably. Ranger supervised, lying on a blanket just inside the shed's dry interior, head lifted to track Cole's movements. Whenever Cole approached, Ranger's tail swept across the wood floor in a soft rhythm. "You're my foreman now," Cole joked one afternoon. "No slacking." Ranger blinked slowly, unimpressed. But watching him get stronger eased something tight in Cole's chest. Still, when night came, the quiet crept in too close. It was in the crackling of the fire, in the creak of the beams under cold, in the way shadows moved differently when the wind pushed against the cabin walls. Sometimes Cole would wake at 2 or 3 a.m., breath shallow, heart pounding, his mind dragging him back into places he never wanted to revisit. Voices, sand, the thud of mortar impact. The memory always started the same way: someone shouting to run, someone falling, someone he couldn't reach in time. That sickening helplessness found him in the dark, like it had memorized the path to him. But now, each time the nightmare wrapped its hands around his lungs, Ranger would rise, limping slightly, and press his warm body against Cole's side. A steady heartbeat, a grounding anchor, a reason to breathe again. "You're too good for this world," Cole whispered into Ranger's fur after one particularly rough night. "Better than I ever deserved." By day, Cole pushed through the lingering exhaustion the way he always had. Stack the wood, brace the beams, keep the hands busy. But the valley wasn't done with him yet. One afternoon, Nora Hale's old pickup rolled slowly up his drive. The veterinarian stepped out, tucking her red-brown hair into a wool beanie as she approached. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching, but didn't rise. Cole waved. "Hey, Doc." She knelt beside Ranger, gentle fingers brushing over the bandage. "How's our hero doing today?" Cole smirked lightly, acting like he didn't take on a predator twice his size. Nora gave a small laugh. "That's dogs for you. More courage than sense." Her tone turned careful. "And you?" Cole looked away, feigning focus on a loose strap of tarp. "I'm fine. Just tired." Nora didn't push, but she didn't look convinced either. She stood, eyeing the shed. "You know, I wasn't sure about this thing when you started building it. Thought it looked unusual. Everyone did, Cole said dryly. But Nora stepped beneath the extended roof, touching the wood stack. It's smart, Cole. Really smart. Solid structure. Dry wood. No wind drafts. It's one of the best setups I've seen. Cole's chest warmed at the acknowledgement more than he expected. Someone finally understood why he built it. But the moment didn't last. By late afternoon, more clouds rolled in. Bruised, heavy ones. The kind that meant another early snow. Cole finished tightening the final panel on the windbreak and wiped frost from his beard. You feel that, Ranger? He asked. Ranger sniffed the air, ears pricked. A faint tremor ran through him, not fear, but instinct. Cole crouched beside him. Weather's changing again, faster than I'd like. He gazed across the valley, where the fields had turned the color of pewter beneath the cloud shadows. Several distant houses smoked from their chimneys, but the town felt oddly still, as though holding its breath for something it sensed before any human did. Cole swallowed. We've got to be ready, buddy. Inside the cabin later, he made a stew of potatoes, venison, and carrots. Ranger ate a small portion, tail wagging once in tired gratitude. The fire crackled steady, warming the room with an amber glow. Cole settled down beside Ranger on the floor. Storm's coming, he murmured. And it's gonna test us. But we're not the same men we used to be, right? Ranger nudged Cole's forearm gently. Yeah, Cole added with a small smile. We're tougher. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow at first, then faster, swirling across the shed roof in ghostly spirals. It wasn't the storm that frightened Cole. It was the feeling in his gut, the one he'd learned to trust long ago. Something in Sierra Valley was building. Something bigger, colder, and far more dangerous. Ranger shifted closer, resting his head on Cole's chest. Cole let out a breath, steadying himself. Whatever comes, he whispered, we adapt. And the valley closed around them, white and silent, as winter sharpened its teeth. The first storm of the season didn't arrive with violence. It crept instead, quiet, steady, deliberate, like a predator testing the edges of its territory. Snow fell softly through the early morning light, settling on fence rails and pine branches, turning Sierra Valley into a muted gray world where every sound felt swallowed by the cold. Cole stepped out onto the porch, breath ghosting in the air. Ranger limped behind him, stronger now, but still healing. The dog sniffed the wind, ears twitching. Yeah, Cole murmured. I feel it too. The strange thing about winter storms in the valley wasn't their intensity. It was the way they announced themselves. Birds disappeared. The wind carried a hollow tone. Even the trees seemed to brace. Cole had learned to read those signs in Afghanistan too, the subtle shifts that came before things went bad. By midday, the soft fall had turned into a thick curtain of white. Snowflakes spiraled relentlessly, like the valley was being erased one layer at a time. Cole tightened the last tarp on a wood stack beneath the shed roof, testing the edges with gloved fingers. It held firm, dry, protected. Ranger barked once, the sound muffled by the snow. What is it? Cole followed the dog's gaze. Down the valley road, through the haze of falling snow, he saw a couple of figures trudging toward him. Bundled, heads bowed, shapes distorted by the storm. As they got closer, Cole recognized Walt Reddick and his teenage son, Kyle. Walt carried an axe over one shoulder, but his movements were stiff with frustration. Ranger's tail lowered defensively. Cole placed a hand on his collar. Easy, boy. Walt stomped up the path, brushing snow from his jacket. You seen how fast this stuff's coming down? He snapped, as though Cole controlled the weather. I noticed, Cole replied evenly. My woodpile's soaked already, Walt said, gesturing angrily toward his land down the slope. Tarp blew off in the wind last night. Snow's sitting 2 inches deep in it. Won't burn right for a week. Cole nodded. Sorry to hear that. Walt scoffed. Don't give me that. You knew storms like this would screw with everybody, didn't you? That's why you built that. He waved at the wraparound shed as if it offended him personally. Thing. Kyle shifted awkwardly beside his father, boots sinking into the thickening snow. Pa, maybe he didn't. Quiet, Walt snapped. Cole stayed calm, though a dull ache tightened behind his ribs. I built it because winter can be unpredictable, he said, and because I've seen what happens when people aren't ready. Walt stepped closer, eyes hard. Folks in this valley know what they're doing. We've survived decades of winters without building wooden circles around our houses. Cole didn't reply immediately. Snow swirled around them, drifting into the shed's sheltered edges, but never settling inside. It fell on Walt's hat, melting before it reached the brim. Finally, Cole said, "Just because something's traditional doesn't mean it can't be improved." Walt's jaw clenched. You trying to say you're better than us? No, Cole answered firmly. I'm saying I'm trying to survive. Same as anyone. A tense moment passed. The wind picked up, carrying with it a low moan that echoed off the ridge. Ranger growled softly, sensing the shift. Walt shook his head, muttering, Valley doesn't need change. He turned sharply. Come on, Kyle. As they headed back down the path, Kyle glanced over his shoulder. His expression wasn't angry. It was uncertain, almost curious. More snow fell, thick and heavy, hiding their footprints as quickly as they made them. Cole sighed, running a hand over Ranger's neck. Storm's not the only thing blowing trouble around here. Ranger leaned into him, warm and steady, grounding him the way only he could. By evening, the house lights in Sierra Valley flickered like dim stars. The storm covered everything, barns, sheds, split-rail fences, until the world looked like one endless sheet of white. Smoke curled weakly from chimneys. Some flues sputtered as wet wood burned poorly, sending dark plumes into the air. Cole watched from his kitchen window, the wraparound shed shielding his own supply from the snow entirely. Dry wood, strong fire, stable heat. He wished he could feel proud. Instead, he felt uneasy. Storms this early weren't normal, and the speed of its arrival, something was off. Later that night, Cole stepped outside with Ranger beside him. Snow reached almost to his shins now, crunching softly beneath his boots. The sky glowed faintly from the moon behind the storm clouds, casting the valley in an eerie, bluish light. Ranger suddenly stopped. His ears jerked upward. A low growl built in his chest. Cole stiffened. What is it? The dog stared into the forest beyond the shed, tail rigid, breath thick in the cold air. Cole followed his gaze, but the snowfall was too dense to make out anything more than shifting shadows. He felt the old, familiar tension creep through him, the battlefield instinct, the one that never truly shut off. The forest rustled. Branches cracked. Something moved out there. Cole reached for the flashlight on his belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the falling snow but revealed nothing. Then, faint and distant, a wolf's howl rose from deep within the timberland, long, sharp, and chilling. Ranger's body trembled, not in fear, but in recognition. Cole slowly exhaled. Animals are desperate early this year. He looked up at the sky where another heavy cloud bank formed, darker than the rest. And that, he muttered, is not a good sign. They returned inside, shaking snow from coats and fur. The fire crackled warmly, but a sense of foreboding seeped beneath the comfort. The first storm had hit early. The animals were restless. The valley felt wrong. Ranger curled beside Cole's feet, lifting his head every so often to listen, alert even in his exhaustion. Cole stared into the flames, lost in thought. Storms don't come alone, he whispered. Outside, the wind began to howl again, low and distant, like a warning traveling down the spine of the mountains, a dark omen for what the valley would face next. By dawn the next day, the world had turned the color of steel. Heavy clouds pressed low, smothering the peaks until the mountains themselves seemed to disappear. The air felt strange, still, almost electric, like the valley was trapped in the quiet breath before something enormous exhaled. Cole stepped outside with Ranger close at his heel. The dog's gait had steadied, though he still guarded his side where the fur hadn't fully grown back. Ranger sniffed the air once, twice, then let out a soft whine. That was all Cole needed. "You feel it too," he murmured. "Something's coming." The radio inside the cabin crackled to life, just static at first. Cole walked back in, adjusting the old antenna until the emergency station sharpened through the white noise. Blizzard warnings issued for western Montana. Repeat, this is not a standard winter system. Expect extreme winds, sudden whiteout conditions, and temperatures dropping rapidly. Travel is not advised. Then, storm classified as the strongest in at least 10 years. Cole stepped back, the words sinking into him like cold water. Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing the shift. He whispered, "The storm of the decade. Perfect." He spent the next hours preparing, checking every brace of the shed, tightening ropes, pulling extra supplies inside. Ranger padded after him, determined to help despite the chill tugging at his injury. By mid-afternoon, the gray sky had thickened into an almost physical weight. Snowflakes began to fall, large, heavy ones dropping fast. The wind turned sharp, biting across Cole's face even through his hood. The valley's distant houses were already fading behind the curtain of weather. Cole stroked Ranger's head. "Inside, buddy." The dog hesitated, naturally stubborn, but obeyed. The storm hit exactly 12 minutes later. The wind didn't rise gradually. It slammed into the valley in one furious blast, rattling the cabin windows hard enough that Cole instinctively braced his hands against the walls. Snow came sideways, not falling, but being hurled through the air in blinding sheets. The roar outside grew so loud, it drowned out every other sound. Trees bending, branches snapping, the crack of ice up the ridge. Ranger growled, pacing near the door. "I know," Cole said, voice low. "I hear it too." The temperature plummeted so fast, the inside of the cabin seemed to shrink, the warmth of the stove struggling to reach every corner. Cole fed the fire with 3 thick logs, watching the flames flare brighter. The wood burned hot and clean, dry as bone thanks to the shed. Without it, he knew he'd be fighting wet, smoldering logs that barely gave off warmth. Outside, the storm intensified. The windows turned white, frost crawling across the glass like reaching fingers. The roof creaked. Ranger's ears pinned back. Then came the sound that made Cole's heart seize. A distant crash. Not thunder, not a tree falling. Something heavier, something collapsing. Cole stepped toward the window, but there was no seeing through the whiteout, just swirling chaos. Still, the noise repeated again, closer this time, and he recognized it with sinking dread. Sheds collapsing. Somewhere in the valley, woodpiles were being buried, roofs caving under snow weight, people trapped, fires dying, winter taking advantage of every weakness. He felt it deep in his chest, a painful stab of memory. Nights in combat zones when the world outside shook, when structures failed, when people he cared for were separated from safety by mere inches. Ranger whined as another gust slammed the cabin. Cole knelt beside him, steadying his breathing. "We're safe. We planned for this. We're okay." But part of him knew, being okay tonight depended on meticulous preparation and a structure everyone had laughed at. Hours passed. The sky turned pitch black, though night had barely begun. The storm raged without slowing, like a beast testing the limits of the valley's endurance. The cabin trembled with every gust. Snow piled so high against the windows it blocked out all light. Cole sat beside Ranger, one hand resting on the dog's neck as they listened to the storm's fury. The fire crackled fiercely, but even it seemed small compared to the howling outside. Suddenly, Ranger's head jerked up, ears forward, body tense. Cole froze. A faint sound drifted through the storm, not the wind, not falling branches. A voice. Faint. Desperate. Cole stood, heart pounding. Ranger paced in tight circles, ears aimed toward the back of the cabin. The storm made it impossible to tell how far away the sound had come from. Then it came again, slightly louder, a muffled cry carried by the wind. Help. Cole felt the instinct rise inside him, the soldier's instinct, the one that said if someone was calling out there, they were in real danger. But he forced himself still. Think, he whispered to himself. Don't rush blind. He turned to Ranger. Is someone out there? Ranger barked once, short, sharp, tail stiff. Cole grabbed the flashlight, then hesitated at the door. Opening it meant letting in the brutal cold, losing heat, risking everything. The cries faded for a moment, swallowed by the storm. Cole stood in the dark, torn between two impossible choices. Save heat, or save someone. Ranger nudged his leg and looked up at him with steady eyes. Cole exhaled. You're right. He cracked the door open just an inch, wind knifing inside, wrenching it out of his hand. Snow blasted the floor. Ranger braced himself, leaning into Cole's leg to keep from sliding. Cole pushed the door shut again with effort, breath shaking. He couldn't step outside. Not yet. He'd never make it 10 feet in that whiteout. Ranger couldn't either, not in his condition. But the cries were real, and someone was in trouble. Cole whispered, We wait for a break. Any break. Then we move. He sat beside Ranger again, both of them listening to the storm rage and collapse the valley's defenses piece by piece. The fire burned hot. The cabin stayed warm. The wood remained dry. But outside, Sierra Valley was failing. And before the night was over, Cole Maddox knew he and Ranger would be the only ones with the means to help, if they survived the storm long enough to try. The blizzard deepened until time itself seemed to freeze. Hours blended together beneath the roar of wind that clawed at the cabin walls, rattling shingles and bending the wraparound shed under its furious weight. Every gust shook the structure like a giant trying to tear it free. Snow slammed against the windows in sheets so thick they looked painted white. Yet inside, the fire burned strong, steady, defiant, fed by the dry wood Cole could reach without stepping foot into the chaos outside. A lifeline. His lifeline. Ranger lay close to the stove, wrapped in blankets, chest rising and falling in shallow but steady breaths. Cole crouched beside him, rubbing slow circles behind his ears. Hang in there, buddy, he whispered. We're not through this yet. Ranger's eyes half opened. He tried to lift his head but lacked the strength, settling instead for pressing his muzzle faintly into Cole's palm. You're doing good, Cole murmured. Real good. But the storm was not slowing. The cries they'd heard earlier had faded, whether swallowed by the wind or silenced by something far worse. Cole didn't know. The weight of not knowing pressed down on him like the snow piling atop his roof. He'd been trained for rescue, for emergencies, for stepping into danger when others couldn't. But this was different. You step outside now, you die. You stay inside now. Someone else might. He sat down heavily beside Ranger, back leaning against the warm side of the stove. The glow of the fire flickered across the cabin walls, painting everything in amber and shadow. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, toward memories he spent years trying to bury. Another storm, another night, another voice calling for help he couldn't reach. He shut his eyes tightly, jaw clenching. "Not again," he whispered. "Not tonight." Ranger lifted a paw weakly, placing it on Cole's knee, a small, grounding gesture. The dog didn't have words, but he didn't need them. His presence alone anchored Cole to the here and now. Cole slid down the wall until he sat on the floor, legs stretched out. Ranger shifted closer, resting his head against Cole's thigh. The cabin creaked under the storm, but inside a strange stillness settled between them. Quiet, heavy, alive. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost meaning. The fire cracked. Ranger breathed, and outside winter screamed its fury, demanding something from the valley. At one point, the wind changed direction abruptly, slamming against the cabin so hard that a cup on the counter rattled. Cole shot up, instincts firing. He raced to the back door leading to the shed, pressing his ear against it. The wraparound structure groaned, but held. "Good girl," he whispered to the wood and nails holding it together. He slid open the small service hatch, designed for exactly this purpose, and reached into the protected corridor to grab more firewood. Warm air slipped out. Cold air tried to burst in, but the door shut quickly, sealing the exchange. Cole fed the stove with fresh logs. Flames roared to life again. Without the wraparound shed, that simple task would have meant crossing a battlefield of ice and wind. If he'd built a normal woodpile, he would have had to shovel through 4 feet of snow. He would have frozen. Ranger, weakened as he was, would have frozen faster. Cole sat beside his dog again and watched the fire, its light flickering across Ranger's tired eyes. He let the warmth wash over him until the cabin hummed quietly. The storm muted behind the thick logs and careful engineering. A sudden trembling in Ranger's body made Cole stiffen. The dog whimpered softly, not in pain, but from cold creeping in deeper than before. Cole wrapped another blanket around him, trying to hold the warmth close. "Stay with me," Cole whispered, voice cracking. "Don't drift. Stay here." A long silence filled the room. Only the sound of the stove breathed life into the cabin. To distract himself and to hold Ranger's attention, Cole began talking softly. "You remember that time in New Mexico?" he murmured, stroking Ranger's head. "Training exercise in the desert? 100 degrees in the shade? You refused to drink until I did." Ranger's tail thumped once. Cole smiled faintly. "Yeah, stubborn, loyal, always watching my back." He swallowed hard. "You saved my life more times than I can count." Outside, a massive gust of wind slammed the side of the cabin, shaking dust from the rafters. The fire flickered. Ranger jerked in his sleep. Cole rubbed the dog's shoulder gently. "Easy. I'm here." Another memory surfaced, one he rarely allowed himself to revisit. A fallen teammate, dust settling across desert rock. The same helpless tightness in his chest as he felt now. Same fear, same desperate prayer. His breath trembled. He leaned over Ranger, forehead lightly touching the dog's. "You're not leaving me," he whispered. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Ranger's slow, warm breath brushed Cole's cheek. It steadied him more than anything else could. The storm raged. The world outside froze. But inside this small cabin, time stood still in a fragile moment between life and loss. Hours later, long past midnight, the storm shifted. The howling softened. The wind settled into long, tired moans. The whiteout eased enough that a faint outline of the shed could be seen through frost-clouded windows. Cole felt the shift instantly. "A break," he whispered. "Finally." He stood slowly, lifting Ranger carefully. The dog's weight pressed into him, warm, fragile, trusting. Cole laid him gently by the fire again. "I'll be right here," he said, "but someone out there might still need help." Ranger's eyes opened, a tired glint of determination shining through. "You think we should go?" Cole murmured. Ranger blinked once. "Yes." Cole rested a hand on the dog's head. "Just a little longer. Let the storm settle. Then, we'll try." The storm had thrown its worst at Sierra Valley. The night had carved a deep silence through the land. And Cole Maddox, one hand on his dog's steady heartbeat, knew dawn would demand everything they had left. Life, warmth, courage, and a will to hold on long enough to save others. The fire burned steady, Ranger breathed, and Cole waited for the light. When dawn finally arrived, it didn't break gently over Sierra Valley. It crawled in, weak, dull, filtered through a sky still choked with storm clouds. The world outside Cole's cabin had become a frozen wasteland. Snowdrifts rose higher than porch rails. Fences had vanished beneath white walls. Even the pine trees bowed under the storm's weight, their branches cracking like distant rifle shots. Cole stood at the window, Ranger beside him, both staring into the pale, eerie morning. The storm had passed, but the silence left behind felt heavier than the roar that came before it. "You ready?" Cole asked softly. Ranger pushed himself upright, still tired, still sore, but his eyes clear, alert, determined. Cole strapped on his gear, heavy coat, snow gaiters, gloves thick enough to fight frostbite. He slung his emergency pack over his shoulder, checked the signal flare, and tucked extra blankets inside. The wind still moaned beyond the walls, but there was a slight break, just enough visibility to move. He opened the cabin door. A wall of cold slammed into his face, sharp as needles. Ranger stepped forward anyway. "Slow," Cole warned, placing a hand on the dog's back as they waded into the thigh-deep snow. The wraparound shed looked almost surreal, its roof sloping clean, untouched by collapse. Snow piled high everywhere except beneath those extended eaves, where the firewood stacks stood bone dry, perfectly sheltered. Cole paused a moment, his breath catching. It worked. Even after the storm of the decade, it worked exactly like he'd designed. But the victory was short-lived. A faint cry carried on the wind, then another. Weak, desperate, human. Cole looked down the valley. Ranger had already locked onto the direction, ears forward, body tense. "Let's move." They pushed through the snow, Cole breaking the path, Ranger limping but refusing to fall behind. The deeper they went, the more the devastation revealed itself. Barns partially collapsed, chimneys buried, sheds flattened under the weight of 5 feet of snow. Smoke rose only from a handful of houses, thin, struggling wisps, not the strong plumes that meant a steady fire. People were freezing. The first cry came from the Reddick property. Cole picked up speed, heart hammering as he climbed over a drift that rose almost to his waist. Ranger scrambled beside him, paws sinking deep. When they crested the mound, a chilling sight spread below them. Walt Reddick was knee-deep in snow by his barn, shouting for help, voice hoarse from cold. He tried to dig through a collapsed woodshed, but every handful of snow he moved was swallowed by more sliding down. His son Kyle crouched beside him, trembling violently, skin pale and lips blue. Their woodpile had been crushed. Snow had buried the rest. Their fire had died hours ago. Cole slid down the drift, Ranger bounding after him. Walt jerked his head up, disbelief washing over his face. "Maddox, thank God. Kyle's freezing. My wood's gone. Nothing'll burn." "Don't talk," Cole ordered gently but firmly. "Get inside. Start boiling water. Use blankets. I'll bring the wood." He didn't wait for permission. Ranger followed him back up the path, both of them moving as fast as deep snow allowed. By the time they reached Cole's shed, the dog was panting, but determined. Cole loaded an armful of dry logs into his pack and grabbed another stack under his arm. "Come on, buddy. We've got a valley to save." They returned to the Reddick's cabin, where Walt struggled to keep his son conscious. Cole dropped to his knees and fed the stove with his dry wood. Flames caught instantly, brilliant, strong, hot. Walt stared at the fire like it was a miracle. How's your wood still dry?" Walt whispered, voice cracking. "Everything out here's drowned in snow." Cole didn't answer. He didn't have time. More cries drifted on the wind. The Millers, the Torrens, old Mrs. Calloway. Families scattered across the valley, each facing the same crisis. Ranger barked sharply, looking toward the next homestead. Cole placed a hand on Walt's shoulder. "Keep feeding the fire. We're not done." He and Ranger moved on, house to house, family to family. Everywhere he went, the story was the same. Collapsed sheds, soaked wood, dying fires, frostbitten hands. People on the edge of panic, staring at Cole like he wasn't the outsider they'd mocked all summer, but the only lifeline they had. And every time they asked how he still had usable firewood, Cole simply nodded toward his wraparound shed. By noon, the storm clouds had fully lifted. Sunlight glinted off the valley's frozen white expanse. Cole trudged forward, Ranger beside him, both exhausted but refusing to stop. They made trip after trip, delivering dry wood, helping relight stoves, covering vents, checking for frostbite, giving instructions for how to keep heat stable. Nora Hale joined them halfway through the valley, cheeks flushed, coat dusted with snow. She knelt to inspect Ranger's wound between stops. "He shouldn't be out here," she murmured. Cole's voice softened. "Try telling him that." Ranger wagged his tail weakly. When they reached the last homestead, Mrs. Calloway's, Cole nearly stumbled from fatigue. She opened the door, a frail widow of near 80, wrapped in quilts, shaking. "Oh, child," she whispered when she saw him. "I thought the good Lord was calling me home today." "Not today, ma'am," Cole replied, placing firewood by her stove. "Let's get this flame going." She clasped his hand with surprising strength. "Bless you, and bless that dog, too." Ranger leaned into her leg gently. When Cole and Ranger finally turned toward home, the valley was alive again. Chimneys smoking strong, fires burning bright, families warming hands over stoves that would have been cold gravestones without the dry wood Cole shared. As he walked, people emerged from porches, calling after him. "Thank you! You saved us! We were wrong about you. That shed of yours, Lord Son, it works." And then Walt Reddick stepped forward, hat in his hands, pride swallowed deep. "Maddox," he said quietly, "I was out of line. I misjudged you. And that thing you built," he gestured toward Cole's property, "it saved my boy. It saved half the valley." Cole blinked, emotion tightening his throat. "I just did what had to be done." Walt shook his head. "No, you did more than that." His eyes drifted to Ranger. "And your dog, he's something else." Ranger stood tall despite his injury, chest expanding proudly. Walt took a breath. "I'm sorry, Cole. Truly. For everything I said." The wind quieted. The valley watched. Cole gave a small nod. Apology accepted. And in that moment, with winter's fury lingering in the air and the valley finally understanding, they all knew. The man they'd mocked wasn't the crazy one. He was the only one who'd seen the danger coming, the only one who'd prepared, the only one who had the courage to help when the storm tried to take everything. Cole Maddox stood in the center of Sierra Valley, Ranger at his side, and for the first time since arriving, he felt something close to belonging. But winter was not finished with them yet. The storm's aftermath clung to Sierra Valley for days. Snowdrifts towered over rooftops. Branches lay snapped and scattered across frozen fields. The land moved slower, like the valley itself was nursing bruises. But fires burned strong in every home now, steady flames born from the dry wood Cole had hauled across the storm-torn land. Word of what he'd done spread faster than the thaw. By the third morning, neighbors began appearing at the edge of his driveway, some carrying casserole dishes, others with blankets or jars of preserves. Folks who once whispered behind his back now approached with hesitant smiles, removing hats, clearing throats, offering thanks they didn't know how to say properly. Cole accepted each one politely, though his instinct was still to shrink away from attention. Ranger accepted every scratch behind the ears like he'd been waiting his whole life for it. But the biggest surprise came when Mayor Hank Doyle arrived. Instead of his usual stiff posture, the mayor walked slowly, shoulders hunched, not from cold, but humility. He stopped a few feet from Cole, hat clutched to his chest. Ranger stood beside Cole, watchful but calm. "Maddox," the mayor began, voice rough, "I owe you more than an apology." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You already apologized." "This one's different." The mayor looked out toward the valley, the smoke rising from chimneys, the repaired barns, the plowed paths finally emerging from the banks of snow. "You saved this valley," he said quietly. "Most folks don't know it yet. But if you hadn't delivered wood, if your setup hadn't worked—" He paused, swallowing. "We'd be mourning families right now." Cole exhaled, eyes drifting to the shed circling his cabin. Snow still clung to the roof in patches, but the structure stood resolute, unbroken, unwavering, just like he had hoped. "I didn't do it alone," Cole said softly. "Ranger did half the work." Ranger barked once, as if agreeing. The mayor chuckled, a rare, honest sound. "We were wrong about you, about that dog, about a lot of things." He hesitated, then added, "And if you're willing, I'd like your permission to show your design to the rest of the valley. Maybe even put it in next month's council bulletin." Cole stiffened, not out of anger, but from surprise. He'd never imagined the valley would embrace something he built. He'd only wanted to survive the winter, not teach anyone how. But then he looked around, at the distant rooftops, at the trails cut through the snow where families had walked safely again, at the warm plumes of smoke rising like beacons of life. "Yeah," Cole said at last. "Share whatever you need." The mayor nodded gratefully. "Thank you, son." When he turned to leave, he paused once more, glancing at Ranger. "That dog of yours," he said softly, "has the heart of 10 men. Cole smiled. "He saved mine first." Ranger leaned against him, warm and steady as ever. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, families gathered around Cole's property. Some to measure the width of the shed structure, some to inspect how airflow kept the wood dry, some simply to see the thing that had kept death from their doors. Mrs. Calloway patted Cole's arm with her frail hand. "Your uncle would be proud, dear." Kyle Reddick approached, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey, thank you for saving my pa, for saving me." Cole nodded. "Just glad you're okay." "And, Kyle added, glancing at Ranger, "your dog's real brave." Ranger wagged his tail, accepting the compliment like a medal. Even Walt Reddick, stubborn as a mule, stepped forward. He looked at the shed, then at Cole, then at Ranger. "Reckon I owe your mutt a steak dinner." Ranger barked. Walt flinched. Folks laughed. It was the first time Cole had heard genuine laughter around him in months, and for once it didn't feel directed at him. As the crowd thinned, Nora Hale stayed behind, kneeling beside Ranger to check his healing wound. "He'll be back to full strength soon," she said with a smile. "He's a survivor, like his owner." Cole met her eyes, the firelight reflecting in them. "Couldn't have done all this without him." "Maybe not," Nora replied, standing. "But he couldn't have done it without you either." The wind calmed as the sun finally dipped away, painting the snow in hues of gold and peach. Cole walked to the shed and placed a hand on one of the beams, solid beneath his glove, warm from the day's light. Ranger pressed against his leg. "This thing gave us a chance," Cole whispered. "Shelter, safety, and maybe something else, too." The dog tilted his head. Cole smiled. Hope. The valley had mocked him, doubted him, feared what they didn't understand. But winter had stripped away the pride, the gossip, the assumptions, and revealed the truth beneath it all. Cole Maddox wasn't a broken soldier hiding in the woods. He wasn't a man running from his past. He wasn't someone to be pitied or dismissed. He was exactly what the valley needed, and Ranger was the heart that held him steady. Weeks later, as the deep cold broke and spring winds whispered over the ridge, more and more homes began sprouting their own wraparound shelters. Variations, experiments, improvements, but all rooted in the blueprint of a soldier who just wanted to survive with his dog. Cole watched them go up one by one, amazed at how quickly the valley adapted once it understood. He never asked for credit. He never wanted praise. All he wanted was this: a place to belong, a reason to stay, a life rebuilt, not erased. One evening, after the last family had packed up their tools and left, Cole stood alone beneath the twilight sky. Ranger lay at his feet, tail sweeping slow arcs across the grass. Cole tapped the shed wall gently. "Well, boy," he murmured, voice low, warm, steady. "We didn't build a fortress after all." Ranger looked up, ears tilted. "We built something that kept folks alive." The dog's tail thumped, and maybe, Cole added softly, maybe we built a home too. Snow still lined the edges of the valley, but the warmth returning to the land matched the warmth returning to Cole's chest. Quiet, steady, earned. He knelt beside Ranger, scratching behind his ears as the first stars blinked into the darkening sky. "We made it, buddy." Ranger leaned in, eyes soft. "We finally made it." And for the first time since the war, Cole Maddox felt whole. The soldier, the dog, the shed they built together. A legacy born not from pride or recognition, but from resilience, loyalty, and the courage to stand alone until the world finally understood. Sierra Valley would never forget it. Neither would he. If you reached this moment in the story, I'd love to know you're still here with us. Drop a simple 1 in the comments, just one number, to let me know you stood with Cole and Ranger all the way to the end. Your comment helps this channel grow, and it lets me know you want more stories just like this one. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey, because Cole, Ranger, and countless other tales of grit, heart, and survival are waiting for you in the videos to come. I'll see you in the next story.